The world has a strange way of revealing a person's true wealth when no one believes they're worth noticing. Rain drifted across the empty streets of downtown Boston, turning the sidewalks into ribbons of silver beneath the glow of old street lamps. Inside Maple and Ash Diner, the dinner rush had faded into a quiet rhythm of clinking coffee cups and distant conversations. Claire Bennett wiped the corner booth beside the front window with the same careful attention she gave every table, whether the guest ordered a $12 meatloaf or nothing more than a refill of black coffee. At 28, Claire had learned that dignity wasn't something customers earned with expensive watches or designer shoes. It was something every person deserved the moment they walked through the door. Most people never noticed that about her. They noticed the simple uniform, the neatly tied blonde hair, the warm smile that somehow survived double shifts and aching feet. They never noticed the quiet intelligence behind her steady green eyes or the calm confidence that refused to disappear, even on the hardest days. Outside, a man paused beneath the flickering neon sign. His coat looked worn. His boots carried dried mud from miles of walking. His gray knit cap shadowed most of his face. He looked like someone the city had forgotten. Nathan Foster glanced through the diner window before slowly opening the door. The tiny bell above it rang softly, but only Claire looked up. Two businessmen near the counter exchanged quick glances before returning to their meals. A young couple lowered their voices. The cashier hesitated for half a second, uncertain whether the newcomer intended to order anything at all. Nathan quietly chose the smallest booth near the window and folded his hands together on the table. He didn't ask for a menu. He didn't call for service. He simply watched the rain collect against the glass. Claire grabbed a clean mug, filled it with fresh coffee, and walked toward him before anyone else moved. "Good evening," she said with an easy smile. "Long day." Nathan looked up, almost surprised someone had spoken to him without suspicion. "You could say that." "Coffee's hot tonight," Claire replied. "Best thing for weather like this." She placed the mug gently in front of him before setting down a small packet of crackers beside it. "Take your time deciding if you'd like something to eat." Nathan looked at the steaming coffee for several quiet seconds. "Thank you." 2 words. Soft. Genuine. Claire simply nodded before returning to her other tables. She never asked why his clothes looked worn. She never wondered whether he could afford the meal. She treated him exactly the way she treated the retired teacher who visited every Thursday or the firefighter who always tipped $5 no matter what he ordered. Across the room, her manager noticed the unfamiliar guest and walked over with a concerned expression. "Claire," he whispered, "keep an eye on that guy. We don't want any problems tonight." Claire glanced toward the window. Nathan sat perfectly still, warming his hands around the mug. "He hasn't caused any problems," she answered quietly. "He's just drinking coffee." Her manager frowned but walked away. Nathan heard every word. He lowered his eyes, hiding the faintest smile. It had been years since anyone defended him without expecting something in return. For the past 48 hours, he had crossed cities wearing ordinary clothes, riding buses, walking crowded sidewalks, sitting alone in parks, searching for something money had quietly erased from his life. Everywhere he went, people saw only appearances. Some ignored him. Others avoided eye contact completely. A few offered polite sympathy before quickly moving on. None of it surprised him anymore. But this waitress was different. She didn't offer pity. She offered respect. There was a difference, and somehow that difference felt larger than every boardroom he had ever walked into. Claire carried another order to a nearby family, crouching briefly beside a little boy to hand him an extra napkin before smiling at his grateful mother. She laughed softly with an elderly couple celebrating 50 years of marriage. She remembered a truck driver's usual slice of apple pie without needing to ask. Every small gesture seemed effortless, as though kindness had become part of her breathing. Nathan watched quietly from across the room, saying nothing. For the first time in a very long time, one of the richest men in America wasn't studying quarterly reports, market forecasts, or billion-dollar investments. He was studying a waitress who made strangers feel seen, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just walked into the most important meeting of his entire life. The hours slipped by with the quiet patience that only small neighborhood diners seemed to understand. Outside, the rain softened into a steady mist that blurred the city lights, while inside Maple and Ash Diner the smell of fresh coffee mixed with warm cinnamon pie and sizzling burgers. Claire Bennett moved from table to table with calm precision, never rushing, never making anyone feel like they were just another order on her ticket. Every guest received the same warm greeting, the same steady smile, the same respectful attention. She remembered names, favorite desserts, and little details that most people forgot. Mr. Donnelly always preferred extra pickles with his sandwich. Mrs. Harris needed 2 lemon slices with her tea. Officer Jenkins never accepted dessert unless someone else at the table ordered it first. Those tiny memories cost Claire nothing, yet they seemed to brighten ordinary evenings in ways money never could. Nathan Foster remained quietly seated near the window, occasionally lifting the warm mug between his hands while observing the room with careful eyes. Years of leading one of the largest companies in America had trained him to notice patterns. He noticed who interrupted conversations, who demanded attention, who thanked the staff. More importantly, he noticed Claire never adjusted her kindness depending on who sat in front of her. When a young attorney wearing a tailored navy suit snapped his fingers for another refill, Claire answered with the same patient courtesy she had shown Nathan. When an elderly veteran accidentally dropped his fork, she picked it up before he could bend down, replacing it with a clean one without drawing attention that might embarrass him. When a tired mother apologized because her toddler spilled crackers across the booth, Claire knelt beside the little boy with a smile and quietly said, "Accidents happen. We will have everything cleaned up in no time." The mother's shoulders relaxed with visible relief. Nathan found himself wondering how many people walked through life carrying invisible burdens that disappeared for a few minutes simply because someone treated them with genuine respect. His own days looked very different. Every conversation in his world carried an agenda. Every invitation came with expectations. Every compliment hid a negotiation somewhere beneath polished words. He could not remember the last time someone had simply asked whether he had a long day without first knowing his last name. Claire eventually returned to his table carrying a steaming bowl of chicken noodle soup and half of a grilled cheese sandwich. Nathan looked up with quiet confusion. "I did not order this," he said. Claire smiled gently. "I know. The kitchen made one extra before closing. It would only go to waste otherwise. I thought it might help warm you up." Nathan hesitated. "I cannot pay for more than the coffee tonight." "Then it is a good thing I am not charging you," Claire answered with an easy smile. "Everyone deserves a hot meal on a rainy evening." She said it so naturally that it sounded less like generosity and more like common sense. Nathan stared at the simple meal for several seconds. In boardrooms, he had signed contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars without emotion. Yet this modest bowl of soup somehow carried more weight than any luxury dinner he had attended in years. Across the room, another server quietly approached Claire. "You keep giving away food like that," she whispered, "and people will start expecting it." Claire glanced toward Nathan before answering softly, "No, they will remember someone treated them kindly when they needed it." Nathan lowered his eyes before either woman noticed he had overheard every word. He slowly picked up the spoon, tasting the soup as warmth spread through his hands and across his chest. It had nothing to do with the recipe. It was the feeling behind it that caught him completely off guard. For years he had believed success was measured by quarterly earnings, expanding markets, and rising stock prices. Sitting alone in a quiet diner on a rainy evening, wearing clothes that hid his identity from the world, he began to suspect that real wealth might look remarkably different. It might sound like a waitress remembering a stranger's comfort before his order. It might feel like a warm bowl of soup placed gently on a table without expectation, without recognition, and without anyone asking for anything in return. That realization settled into the silence between each falling raindrop, and for the first time since beginning his quiet journey, Nathan no longer felt invisible. The wall clock above the kitchen quietly crept toward 9 o'clock as the last wave of customers slowly disappeared into the cool evening air. Maple and Ash Diner settled into its familiar closing routine. Chairs were turned upside down onto empty tables. The soft hum of the refrigerator became easier to hear as conversations faded away. Claire Bennett carried a tray of empty coffee cups toward the kitchen before returning to Nathan's booth with a fresh refill without waiting for him to ask. "Looks like you could use one more," she said with a gentle smile. Nathan looked at the steaming mug before meeting her eyes. "You seem very certain." Claire laughed softly. "It is one of the few things I have become good at. Coffee usually solves at least half of a long day." Nathan smiled for what felt like the first genuine time in months. And the other half? Claire shrugged lightly. Someone willing to listen. She said it almost absent-mindedly, while wiping the edge of the table with a clean towel. Nathan studied her expression. There was no rehearsed friendliness. No hidden expectation. She simply believed what she had said. Before he could answer, the front door opened again. A middle-aged man stepped inside, shivering slightly as he removed his damp baseball cap. His jacket was faded, and he carefully counted a few wrinkled bills before approaching the counter. Claire recognized him immediately. "Good evening, Mr. Walters," she called warmly. "You are running late tonight." The man smiled with quiet embarrassment. "Long shift at the warehouse. I guess I lost track of time." Claire glanced toward the kitchen. The grill had already been cleaned. Most of the food had been put away. Without hesitation, she disappeared behind the swinging door and returned a minute later carrying a plate with meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and a warm dinner roll. "Mr. Walters looked surprised. I thought the kitchen was closed." Claire smiled. "For everyone else, maybe. Not for someone who worked 12 hours today." The man reached into his pocket again, counting his money for a second time. Claire gently placed her hand over the bills before he could finish. "You already paid last week when you covered that teenager's meal after he forgot his wallet. Tonight this one is on us." Mr. Walters looked down, his eyes growing slightly glossy. "I only did what anybody should have done." Claire answered quietly, "Exactly." Nathan watched every second without interrupting. There was no audience applauding. No cameras recording acts of kindness for social media. There was only a tired waitress ending a long shift and quietly making another person's evening a little easier. Something about that simplicity lingered in Nathan's thoughts. His entire career had been built around measurable outcomes. Profit margins, market shares, performance reports. Yet nothing inside this diner seemed to follow those rules. Claire invested kindness with no guarantee of return. Somehow it kept multiplying anyway. As Mr. Walters thanked her one last time before leaving, Nathan reached into the inside pocket of his worn coat. Hidden beneath the plain fabric rested a leather wallet containing enough credit cards to purchase the entire building without hesitation. He looked at it for a long moment before quietly sliding it back into place. He had promised himself that this journey would not end with money solving every problem. If he revealed who he really was tonight, every interaction would instantly change. The respect Claire had shown him would suddenly be explained away by wealth instead of character. He wanted to know whether genuine kindness could exist without the influence of power. Across the room, Claire finished balancing the register before gathering her own belongings. Nathan noticed her carefully placing a small envelope into her purse. The corner had the logo of a local medical clinic printed across it. She paused for only a moment before taking a slow breath and closing the bag. Whatever worry crossed her face disappeared the instant another employee asked whether she was ready to head home. She answered with the same reassuring smile she had worn all evening. Nathan quietly wondered how many invisible burdens she carried while somehow making everyone else's feel lighter. As the lights inside the diner dimmed one by one, he realized that his unexpected journey had already begun changing him in ways no business strategy ever could. For the first time in decades, he found himself wanting to understand the person behind the quiet smile instead of the title behind the expensive suit, and he walked into the cool night with one simple thought echoing louder than the rain had only hours before. Perhaps the strongest people were never the loudest ones. Perhaps they were simply the ones who kept choosing kindness when life gave them every reason to stop. The following afternoon arrived wrapped in bright autumn sunlight, washing away every trace of the previous night's rain. Maple and Ash Diner filled steadily as office workers escaped their desks for lunch, retirees gathered around familiar booths, and travelers wandered in looking for a warm meal before continuing down Interstate 90. Claire Bennett tied on her apron, tucked a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear, and greeted every customer with the same quiet warmth that had become part of the restaurant itself. No one would have guessed that before sunrise, she had already spent 2 hours sitting in a waiting room at Boston Community Medical Center, listening carefully as a doctor explained another round of treatments for her father. The envelope Nathan had noticed the night before contained appointment schedules, prescription costs, and insurance forms that seemed to grow thicker every month. Claire folded every page neatly before leaving the hospital because she had made herself one promise years earlier. Whatever worries followed her into work would never become someone else's burden. As lunchtime reached its busiest hour, she moved gracefully through the crowded dining room, balancing heavy trays while remembering birthdays, favorite drinks, and familiar faces. Her smile never looked forced. It looked practiced in the gentlest way, like someone who had decided that kindness was not a feeling but a daily choice. Across the street, Nathan Foster watched through the diner window from a park bench beneath an old maple tree. He had returned wearing the same worn jacket and faded boots, careful to keep the disguise that had allowed him to disappear into ordinary life. His security team had protested earlier that morning after finally locating him through the emergency phone he carried but rarely used. Nathan had dismissed every concern with a simple instruction that surprised them all. Stay back. Do not interfere. For another day, he wanted to remain invisible. He wanted to learn something quarterly reports could never teach. When he stepped inside, Claire recognized him immediately. "Welcome back," she said with a genuine smile that carried no surprise and no hesitation. "I was hoping the weather would be kinder to you today." Nathan smiled softly. "It seems you got your wish." "Window booth?" she asked. "If it is available. It has been waiting for you." Nathan paused for the briefest moment. Few people in his world remembered what he preferred unless an assistant reminded them first. Claire remembered because she paid attention. Nothing more, nothing less. As he settled into the familiar seat, he watched a teenage busboy accidentally drop an entire tray of clean silverware across the floor. Forks and spoons scattered in every direction with a loud metallic crash. The young employee froze, his face turning bright red as several customers looked over. Before the manager could reach him, Claire quietly knelt beside the teenager and began gathering the silverware one piece at a time. "It happens," she said calmly. "Take a breath. We will have everything ready again in 5 minutes." "I am sorry," the teenager whispered. "I keep messing things up." Claire looked at him with reassuring eyes. "Dropping silverware does not define your day. What you do next does." Together, they finished cleaning the floor before returning to work as though nothing unusual had happened. Nathan noticed something remarkable. The teenager stood a little straighter afterward. One sentence had restored confidence that embarrassment had almost taken away. A short time later, an elderly woman entered using a cane, searching for an empty table near the entrance because walking farther seemed difficult. Before anyone asked, Claire quietly rearranged 2 smaller tables to create more space and helped the woman sit comfortably without making her feel helpless. "Thank you, dear," the woman said with a grateful smile. "Most places tell me to wait." Claire simply answered, "Everyone should feel welcome before they feel hungry." Nathan lowered his eyes toward his coffee, allowing those words to settle inside him. He had spent years building office towers designed to impress investors, luxury hotels that overlooked breathtaking skylines, and conference rooms filled with polished marble and crystal chandeliers. Yet this modest diner possessed something many of those places quietly lacked. It made people feel that they mattered before asking what they could spend. As sunlight streamed through the front windows, Nathan realized he was no longer observing Claire because she fascinated him. He was observing her because she reminded him of the person he once hoped success would never change. Somewhere between board meetings, acquisitions, and endless ambition, he had stopped measuring life by moments like these. Watching Claire welcome strangers with unwavering dignity felt less like discovering someone extraordinary and more like rediscovering a forgotten part of himself that had been waiting patiently to come home. The afternoon slowly melted into early evening as long shadows stretched across the sidewalk outside Maple and Ash Diner. The steady rhythm of the lunch crowd gave way to quieter conversations, the kind that lingered over warm coffee instead of hurried schedules. Nathan Foster remained in his familiar booth near the window, unnoticed by nearly everyone except the waitress who never seemed to overlook anyone. Claire Bennett refreshed his coffee without asking, setting the mug down with the same gentle care she had shown from the very first evening. "You have become one of our regulars," she said with a light smile. Nathan looked up from the notebook resting beside his plate. "Is that a good thing?" Claire laughed softly. "It usually means someone has found a place where they feel comfortable." Nathan looked around the modest diner with its worn wooden booths, framed photographs of old Boston neighborhoods, and handwritten pie menu hanging above the counter. I think you might be right. Claire excused herself as another customer waved politely from across the room. Nathan watched her disappear into the familiar rhythm of service once again. She never hurried people who needed extra time. She never ignored those who seemed lonely. Every conversation lasted only seconds, yet somehow each person walked away feeling that they had been given something far greater than food. A delivery driver entered carrying several large boxes for the kitchen. While helping move them through the narrow hallway, Claire noticed an elderly man sitting alone near the entrance studying the menu with quiet uncertainty. His hands trembled slightly as he counted a handful of dollar bills beneath the table, carefully adding them together before looking back at the prices. Claire recognized the expression immediately. It was not hunger alone. It was the quiet calculation of someone hoping dignity would survive the meal. Without drawing attention, she walked into the kitchen and spoke briefly with the cook. A few moments later, she returned carrying a plate filled with turkey, mashed potatoes, vegetables, and fresh bread. She placed it gently before the man. "Congratulations," she said with a warm smile. "You are our 100th customer today. Dinner is on the house." The man's surprised eyes widened. "Really?" Claire nodded naturally. "It happens every now and then." The grateful smile that spread across his face answered more loudly than words ever could. Nathan quietly observed the exchange, but what caught his attention most was what happened next. After the man finished eating, Claire slipped into the kitchen, opened her own wallet, and quietly placed several folded bills inside the register before anyone else noticed. She was not using restaurant money. She was replacing the cost herself. She believed no one was watching. Nathan lowered his eyes, suddenly understanding why every act of kindness inside this diner felt so genuine. It carried a personal cost. Later that evening, as Claire organized receipts near the register, her telephone vibrated softly inside her apron pocket. She glanced at the screen for only a second before stepping into the hallway beside the kitchen. Nathan could not hear every word. Only fragments carried through the partially open door. "Yes, doctor. I understand. I will find a way before next Friday. Thank you for calling." When she returned a minute later, the familiar smile had returned to her face so completely that none of the customers appeared to notice anything had changed. Only Nathan noticed the faint trace of concern that lingered quietly behind her eyes before disappearing beneath calm determination. He found himself wondering how someone carrying so much uncertainty could still spend every day giving other people hope. His own problems had always been solved with resources, advisors, and influence. Claire seemed to solve hers with courage that no balance sheet could measure. As closing time approached, Nathan reached for the check, expecting only the coffee and simple sandwich he had ordered. Instead, he found a handwritten note beside the receipt. It read, "Thank you for spending another afternoon with us. Travel safely, and do not forget to take care of yourself." There was no signature because none was needed. Nathan folded the small piece of paper carefully and slipped it inside his jacket as though it were something priceless. In a world where people had spent years handing him contracts, investment proposals, and luxury gifts, one handwritten sentence from a waitress had somehow become the most valuable thing he had received in a very long time. As he quietly stepped outside beneath the golden colors of the fading autumn sky, he realized he was no longer searching to discover whether kindness still existed in the world. He had already found it. The question waiting in front of him now was far more difficult. How could one ordinary woman, carrying burdens no one else could see, make everyone around her feel richer than the wealthiest man in America ever had? 3 evenings later, the air carried the crisp chill that always arrived before the first real frost of the season. Golden leaves drifted across the sidewalk outside Maple and Ash Diner, while headlights reflected against the restaurant windows like slow-moving stars. Inside, the familiar warmth welcomed everyone who stepped through the front door. Claire Bennett had already completed 9 hours on her feet, yet nothing in her expression suggested exhaustion. She greeted every customer with the same calm smile that somehow made strangers feel less like visitors and more like neighbors returning home. Nathan Foster entered quietly once again, wearing the same weathered coat and faded cap that had hidden his identity since this unexpected journey had begun. Claire looked up immediately. "Good evening," she said. "Your booth is ready." Nathan smiled. "You always remember." Claire placed a menu on the table even though she already knew what he would probably order. People remember what matters to them. Those simple words lingered in Nathan's thoughts long after she walked away. For years, assistants had remembered his schedule because they were paid to. Executives remembered his preferences because promotions depended on it. Investors remembered his opinions because fortunes followed his decisions. Claire remembered because she genuinely cared. The difference was impossible to ignore. As dinner service became busier, Nathan quietly observed another ordinary evening that somehow felt extraordinary. A college student studying for final exams occupied a corner booth surrounded by textbooks. Claire refilled the student's coffee without interrupting the notes spread across the table. A retired couple celebrated another anniversary with nothing more expensive than meatloaf and pie. Claire found a small candle from the kitchen and placed it beside their dessert, turning an ordinary meal into a quiet celebration. Every thoughtful gesture happened naturally, never seeking recognition. Later, while carrying dishes toward the kitchen, Claire noticed a little girl standing near the entrance wearing a thin sweatshirt despite the dropping temperature outside. Her mother quietly apologized after explaining that their car had broken down several blocks away and roadside assistance had been delayed. Without hesitation, Claire disappeared into the employee break room before returning with her own knitted scarf. She gently wrapped it around the little girl's shoulders. "You can give it back another day," she said softly. The mother immediately shook her head. "We could never take your scarf." Claire smiled. "Tonight it belongs to whoever needs it most." Nathan watched the exchange in complete silence. He knew enough about people to recognize when generosity came from abundance and when it came from sacrifice. Claire's scarf was not an extra one she happened to have. It was the same light blue scarf she had worn every chilly evening since he first met her. She quietly gave away something she personally needed without stopping to calculate the cost. That realization settled heavily inside him. A short time later, Claire stepped outside during her brief break, carrying a paper cup of tea instead of buying dinner for herself. Nathan remained inside, watching through the window as she sat alone on the wooden bench beside the entrance. She removed a folded notebook from her purse and carefully reviewed handwritten numbers. Medical expenses, monthly rent, utility bills, prescription costs. Every figure was written neatly in blue ink. After adding everything together, she closed her eyes for a brief moment before drawing a single line beneath the final total. Then, instead of looking discouraged, she quietly smiled to herself, tucked the notebook away, and walked back inside just as another family entered the diner. Her worry stayed outside with the falling leaves. Her kindness walked back through the door. Nathan lowered his eyes. During decades of building one of the largest business empires in the country, he had often admired resilience in annual reports and corporate speeches. Now he understood that true resilience rarely appeared in headlines. Sometimes it looked like a waitress choosing hope after reading bills she did not yet know how to pay. Sometimes it sounded like a warm greeting offered moments after carrying private fears no one else would ever see. As closing time approached, Nathan quietly stood and prepared to leave. Claire handed him his receipt along with a small paper bag. "You forgot dessert," she said. Nathan looked inside and found a slice of homemade apple pie carefully wrapped for the road. "I did not order this." Claire smiled with gentle amusement. "No, but I noticed you looked at it twice yesterday." Nathan laughed softly, almost unable to believe she had remembered such a small detail. "You notice everything, do not you?" Claire shrugged modestly. "Not everything, just the things that help people feel a little more at home." Nathan thanked her before stepping into the cool evening, carrying the warm paper bag in one hand. As he disappeared into the quiet Boston night, he made a decision that would change both of their lives forever. Tomorrow would be the final day of his disguise, but before the truth could be revealed, he wanted to witness one last ordinary moment from the extraordinary woman who had unknowingly reminded the richest man in the room what real wealth had always looked like. The next morning arrived with a sky so clear it seemed impossible that only days earlier cold rain had washed the streets of Boston. Maple and Ash Diner opened as it always had, with the smell of fresh coffee filling the dining room before the first customer even stepped inside. Claire Bennett unlocked the front door a few minutes early, greeting the regulars who waited outside with the familiar smile that had become part of their morning routine. Nothing about the day appeared different. Yet only a few blocks away, an entirely different morning was unfolding. Nathan Foster stood inside the back seat of a black luxury sedan while an assistant handed him a freshly pressed navy suit. The worn jacket, faded boots, and gray knit cap rested neatly folded beside him. For several quiet moments he looked at them without speaking. Those simple clothes had given him something his fortune never could. They had allowed him to meet people without influence, titles, or expectations. More importantly, they had led him to someone who measured human worth by character alone. His chief of staff finally broke the silence. The board meeting begins at 10 o'clock. Every major financial network has been asking where you disappeared this week. Nathan adjusted his cuff links, but kept his eyes on the folded coat. They can wait another hour. The assistant looked surprised. Nathan rarely delayed anything. There is one place I need to visit first. Meanwhile, inside the diner, Claire balanced breakfast orders while quietly encouraging the newest server, who still struggled to remember table numbers. "Do not worry about being perfect," she said gently. "People remember how you make them feel long before they remember whether the toast arrived 2 minutes late." The young server smiled with obvious relief. Before Claire could return to the kitchen, a low murmur spread across the dining room. One customer looked toward the front window, then another. Outside, a line of polished black vehicles slowly turned onto the street. They moved with quiet precision before stopping one after another along the curb. Expensive sedans stretched almost the entire length of the block, their dark windows reflecting the morning sunlight. Pedestrians slowed their pace. Nearby shop owners stepped outside to watch. Even the cook paused beside the kitchen window. Claire looked up in quiet confusion. "Is someone important coming?" one customer whispered. The manager immediately straightened his tie and hurried toward the entrance. Moments later, the rear door of the first sedan opened. A tall man stepped onto the sidewalk wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, polished leather shoes, and a silver watch that caught the morning light. His posture carried calm confidence instead of arrogance. Several people nearby immediately recognized him. Soft whispers traveled through the crowd. Nathan Foster, the billionaire who rarely appeared in public without making national headlines. Claire froze for only a heartbeat as Nathan slowly walked toward the diner. There was something familiar about the way he smiled, something impossible to place until his eyes met hers. Suddenly, she saw past the tailored suit. She remembered the worn coat, the faded boots, the quiet man who always chose the window booth. Nathan stepped inside as every conversation faded into complete silence. He walked directly toward Claire before stopping only a few feet away. "Good morning," he said with the exact same calm voice she had heard every day that week. Claire searched his face, disbelief slowly giving way to understanding. "It was you," she whispered. Nathan nodded gently. "Yes." The manager's expression turned pale as he looked from Nathan to Claire and back again. Several employees stood completely still, uncertain whether they should speak at all. Nathan ignored every curious glance around him. His attention never left Claire. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "I never intended to deceive you. I came here hoping to understand whether kindness still existed when there was nothing to gain from offering it." Claire remained silent, still absorbing the truth unfolding before her. Nathan continued with a warmth that surprised everyone listening. "Every meal you served, every conversation we shared, every small act of generosity happened because you believed another person deserved respect. You never knew my name. You never cared about my bank account. You simply chose kindness every single time." The entire diner stood motionless. For the first time since walking through those doors, Nathan Foster was no longer the billionaire the world admired. He was simply a grateful man standing before the one person who had quietly changed the way he understood success. And in the stillness that followed, every person inside Maple and Ash Diner realized they had just witnessed something far more valuable than wealth. They had witnessed the rare moment when genuine character was finally recognized for what it had always been worth. The silence inside Maple and Ash Diner lingered for several long seconds before the ordinary sounds of the restaurant slowly returned. Coffee continued to pour. Plates continued to leave the kitchen. Yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Every employee looked at Claire Bennett with new eyes, while every customer quietly glanced between her and Nathan Foster, still trying to understand how the woman who had served breakfast only moments earlier had unknowingly earned the respect of one of the most successful businessmen in America. Nathan reached into the inside pocket of his tailored jacket and removed a small cream-colored envelope. He placed it gently on the table nearest Claire. "There is something I would like to offer you," he said. "Inside is an opportunity that I hope will make your life easier." Claire looked at the envelope, but made no move to open it. "What is it?" she asked softly. Nathan answered honestly. "Enough money to cover your father's medical treatment, your living expenses for several years, and a position at my foundation if you ever decide you want a different future." A quiet murmur spread through the room. The manager lowered his eyes in disbelief. The newest server covered her mouth with both hands. For many people, the offer sounded like the answer to every problem they had ever imagined. Claire remained perfectly still. She slowly pushed the envelope back across the table until it rested in front of Nathan once again. He looked at her with quiet surprise. "You have not even opened it." Claire smiled gently. "I do not need to know the number inside to know why you are offering it." Nathan studied her face. There was no pride, no anger, no hesitation, only calm sincerity. "Then why refuse?" Claire folded her hands together before answering. "Because I did not serve you hoping you would change my life." Nathan remained silent. Claire continued in the same gentle voice she had used with every customer who had ever walked through the diner doors. "When you first came here, I thought you looked tired. I thought you needed a warm meal and someone to treat you with respect. If I accept a reward for doing what I believe every person deserves, then I would spend the rest of my life wondering whether my kindness had a price after all." Those words settled over the room more powerfully than any speech Nathan had ever heard in a corporate boardroom. He had spent decades negotiating billion-dollar agreements, yet nothing had prepared him for the quiet conviction of a waitress who refused to place a value on compassion. Nathan looked down at the envelope before slowly placing it back inside his jacket. Then he smiled, not with disappointment, but with admiration. "You have just taught me another lesson." Claire tilted her head slightly. "What lesson is that?" Nathan answered without looking away from her. "That dignity cannot be purchased any more than kindness can." Claire's smile widened ever so slightly. "Then perhaps we both learned something this week." Nathan laughed softly, and the sound carried warmth instead of authority. After a brief pause, he spoke again. "May I ask you for one favor instead?" Claire nodded. "Of course." Nathan glanced around the diner before returning his attention to her. "Tell me what you would change if you had the chance. Not for yourself. For people like the ones you quietly help every day." Claire did not answer immediately. She looked toward the elderly customers sharing breakfast near the window, the young family gathered around a corner booth, the teenage server carefully carrying a tray with growing confidence, and finally toward the front door where new guests continued walking inside, unaware they had entered a place where something extraordinary had just happened. "I would remind people," she said at last, "that the hardest battles are usually invisible. The person serving your coffee may be worried about a parent. The man eating alone may be carrying loneliness. The child smiling at the next table may have had a difficult week. We would all treat each other differently if we remembered that every person is carrying a story we cannot see." Nathan felt those words settle deep within him. They were simple, honest, impossible to forget. He slowly extended his hand. Claire accepted it with the same quiet confidence she had shown since the first evening they met. There was no applause, no dramatic celebration, only a handshake between two people who now understood that the greatest transformations rarely begin with wealth or power. They begin the moment one human being chooses to see another with compassion instead of judgment. 1 year passed with the quiet certainty of changing seasons, and although Maple and Ash Diner looked much the same from the outside, something inside had begun to ripple far beyond its familiar walls. Customers still gathered over fresh coffee before work. Families still celebrated birthdays in the corner booths. Claire Bennett still tied on the same simple apron every morning, greeting every stranger with the same warm smile that expected nothing in return. She had received countless invitations after the story quietly spread across newspapers and television interviews. Companies wanted her to become the face of customer service campaigns. Publishers wanted her to write books. Speakers' bureaus offered contracts that promised more money than she had ever imagined. Claire thanked every one of them with genuine appreciation before politely declining. She believed there was nothing extraordinary about what she had done. She had simply treated another human being with kindness. That, in her mind, should never become unusual enough to deserve applause. Nathan Foster, however, had kept the promise hidden inside that final conversation. He never sent another envelope filled with money. He never tried to persuade Claire to leave the diner. Instead, he built something inspired by the lesson she had given him. 6 months after their meeting, the Foster Foundation announced a nationwide program called the Quiet Kindness Initiative. Rather than recognizing celebrities, executives, or public figures, the foundation invited ordinary people to nominate restaurant servers, nurses, janitors, bus drivers, grocery clerks, teachers, and countless others whose daily acts of compassion quietly improved the lives of complete strangers. Every month, recipients received financial assistance, educational opportunities, or emergency support without publicity or obligation. The only requirement was that someone else had experienced genuine kindness from them when they needed it most. During the foundation's opening ceremony in Boston, reporters expected Nathan to stand before cameras and speak about leadership, innovation, or philanthropy. Instead, he stepped onto the stage carrying a simple framed photograph. It showed a young waitress placing a warm cup of coffee in front of a man wearing an old coat beside the window of a small neighborhood diner. There were no photographers present when the picture had been taken. One of Nathan's security team had quietly captured the moment from outside because they sensed something important was unfolding. Nathan placed the photograph on an easel before speaking. "People often ask me what changed my understanding of success," he said. "They expect me to mention an acquisition, a market breakthrough, or a business mentor. The truth is much simpler. One ordinary morning, someone treated me with respect before knowing my name. That single decision reminded me that influence is measured less by what we own than by how we make other people feel." The audience remained completely silent. Claire sat quietly in the last row because Nathan had personally invited her, knowing she would never choose the front. When the applause finally filled the auditorium, she looked around almost uncomfortably, wishing the attention belonged to every person who quietly practiced kindness without recognition. After the ceremony, Nathan found her standing outside beneath the brilliant colors of another New England autumn. The crisp breeze carried falling leaves across the sidewalk exactly as it had on the day they first met. "You still work at the diner," Nathan said with a smile. Claire nodded. "Someone has to remember who likes extra coffee and who always orders apple pie." Nathan laughed softly. "I had a feeling you would say that." They stood together for a quiet moment watching people hurry past without realizing how profoundly two ordinary lives had crossed. Finally, Nathan asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had walked into another restaurant that night?" Claire smiled toward the busy street before answering. "Then I hope another waitress would have been kind to you." Nathan lowered his eyes, understanding that her answer revealed everything about the person she had always been. She never believed goodness belonged to one individual. She believed it could belong to everyone if they chose it. As the afternoon sunlight settled gently across the city, Claire returned to the place where she felt she could do the most good, and Nathan walked away carrying a lesson no fortune could ever purchase. Long after the headlines faded and the interviews ended, people continued sharing stories of unexpected kindness, each one inspiring another, until compassion quietly traveled farther than wealth ever could. Because in the end, the richest hearts are never recognized by the size of what they keep. They are remembered by the quiet hope they leave behind in the lives of others.